ever struggled to make sense of your data or felt that your audience just isn't getting the story your numbers tell? In this episode, we explore how to transform raw data into compelling narrative that captivates and informs. So to help me unpack this important topic, I'm super excited to speak today with David Smith. He is the former Chief Data Officer at the Venture City. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Shlomi. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Great. So before we get started, maybe if you can tell us a little bit about your journey, your backstory.
Sure. I came to data science a little bit later in my career than other people. It was kind of the career that I always wanted, but it didn't exist yet until I discovered it in about 2015. Prior to that, I had worked in IT consulting and software product management, straddling the line between business and IT and being able to talk to both types of people. And I think that background has given me it's given me the basis for launching a career in data. So what ended up happening is I was doing some consulting for a client, and they came to me with a lot of records of data. They had customers and transactions, and I needed to combine them into one big data set, and it was too much for my Excel to handle. So I started looking for other tools, and I found Python and MySQL and all these other and this whole thing called data science. And I said, oh, okay, this is what I always wanted to do. This is, and so it was more than just a solution for that one client. It was like, okay, I want to point my whole career in this direction. And so that's what I did. And so here I am 9 years later, having just finished a stint as the Chief Data Officer at the Venture City. And I am I continue to love to explore data, and I'm very excited about where things are going with data and AI, and how that is going to drive us all forward into the future.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. What I really like about your story is that what drove the need was actually a client engagement, and sometimes that's the best opportunities for people to kind of dig deeper, because people read something in your background that they thought you might be able to fulfill, and then you had to kind of dig deeper to satisfy that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, and so that's
exactly
what I had to do in that case.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to one of my standing question I ask all my guests, since we are, all about visual storytelling. So how would you define visual storytelling from your perspective?
I think it goes back to the beginning of humanity, really, where we are social creatures that, sat around the campfire at night and told stories to each other. And that is, I just think of stories as being fundamental to who we are as a species, right? And the good stories about, there's a woolly mammoth down here, don't go over there, or here's where we can find some food, or all those things are core to who we are. And I think there's frameworks like Freytag's pyramid, right? That tap into that innate part of us that needs to hear things in stories, right? So, and then I think in later years, as it's become easier and easier to visualize things, whether that's through photojournalism or data analysis or other things, it's just easier and easier to create visual assets that you can use to communicate with other people. And so, I think those are just an extension of this, innate characteristics of us as humans that help us communicate with one another. And so, if you can take that visual medium and make it part of a story, then you can convince and cajole and compel and sell things to people, or influence them in some way. And that to me is an important part of data storytelling.
Awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. I really like, the fact that, since the caveman, when we drew those animals on the wall, it's no different from, our today's wall on TikTok. We just use different technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little easier to distribute it to more people
and reach more people. So yeah.
But I think it's always worth remembering that, go back to, stories it's not just like they're for everybody, right? They're for, it's not just for advertising people or, people in marketing. It's for everybody, because we all have a story and we all need to be able to tell that story. And if you employ visual storytelling techniques, then you can be more effective at telling that story.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So now that we know a little bit about visual storytelling, let's zero in on our today's topic, which is how would you define data storytelling?
Well, data is one subset of these, creative assets, these visual assets that we can use to communicate a story. Yeah. And so there are a lot of aspects to telling a good data story. Cole Nussbauer Knaflic has a book called Storytelling with Data that discusses a lot of this, but there's a whole science and art to creating visuals from raw data, where you can help the reader or the viewer hone in on what's important. And I think that's the trick, is that there's something you're trying to communicate. Raw data is really, really messy, and it's hard to get any insight from that. Yep. So the trick is to take all this really messy data and boil it down into something that resembles the truth of what the data is trying to say, and communicates it in such a way that it's clear what the takeaway needs to be, as opposed to, you've probably seen, there are lots of examples of bad visualizations that present way too much data, or they have what's called chart junk, where they present too many colors and too many. They might use emojis on the chart, and it just it's like they're trying to.
Fudge the numbers or over mask another truth, maybe sometime.
Well, it's just like they're trying to do something maybe artistic, but they lose the plot in terms of why you're creating the visual.
Got it.
And it's usually the case that simpler is better, and that if you can, have a point that you're trying to make, and then you gear your chart and presentation towards trying to make that point, and forget about any other ancillary agenda that you might have for that chart. Just focus on communicating one point that you want the user or the viewer to take away.
Yeah. I know this golden rule of every slide needs to communicate a single message. It's always kind of guided me. But let's talk a little bit about specific use cases, because I remember when I was working in marketing teams, we'll get all these huge piles of data, as you said, and we need to turn them into compelling presentation. And the way I was trained was really, you got to figure out what is the root cause or the story behind the numbers that you want to really communicate. So the numbers basically represent like the final outcome, but there was reasoning and rationale behind it for them to appear in the first place. So maybe you can talk a little bit about use cases for data storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is it's like an iceberg. What someone sees is a very small percentage of all of the work that went into it. Exactly. And actually making something complicated into something simple is a lot of hard work. Yeah. So in the as far as use cases, so my most recent experience is with the Venture City. The Venture City is a global VC fund and startup accelerator, and so a lot of the work that we did was trying to take the data that the companies were generating, right? Uh-huh. all the click stream data. Every time you click on the submit button, or every time you
Yep.
open the app, there's an event that's triggered, and we're interested in seeing what that event is, and learning who did it and what time did they do it. And so obviously, if you the bigger the app, the more of this information you have, and it can be a
Sure.
lot. And so we're trying. So that's kind of what's at the bottom of the iceberg in this case.
Yep.
Is there's all this like event data, clickstream, or it could be transactions. It could be like every time someone calls an API for a fintech.
Right.
All the little things that are happening. We're trying to then boil that down and say, all right, what can we learn from that information? What
Yep.
can we learn about whether or not this product has product market fit?
Sure.
And so the way you can think about product market fit. So are you familiar with that concept?
I'm familiar, but maybe just give a quick definition.
Yeah. So it's where you're building a product, and there's a market that wants that product. You're building a product that people want, and that market is willing to pay for that product. And you can get to that market through marketing channels. And so, you're trying to establish, have they reached some signals of that they've gotten to this point in their journey? Because, a startup starts out as really just a series of experiments, right?
Yep.
You're trying to find, like, is this product idea that I have in my head something that people want? Or
Right.
you're saying, I've got a bunch of customers that have this really this need or this pain point that they're trying to solve. And, can I build a product that will help them do that? And so maybe you start, and you've heard about a minimum viable product. And
Yep.
so you may release this product into the wild and get people to start using it. And, you start to see, like, do they like it? Do they not like it? What can I do to tweak it? And so it's like using this, putting the product out there as a way to get feedback on the product.
Right.
And so if you can instrument that product, then you can start to collect this clickstream data that I was talking about before.
Yep.
And learn about how people are using it. So that leads to, what can we learn from data about product market fit? And I break it down into a couple of different areas. There's, first of all, engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of think of engagement, is there anybody out there that likes this? And not just do they like it, but do they come back and use it again and again?
Right.
So, like, I don't know, the New York Times app on my phone with all the games in it, I'm very engaged in that. I use it all the time. My let's see, my insurance company, I'm not that engaged in it. I pay them every month, which is great, but I'm not using it all the time. So there's different ways to think about it, engagement, depending on what type of product it is. But what we generally look at is frequency of use as a way of measuring engagement.
Return users. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me share my screen, and give me a second to get to the full screen here.
All right.
Okay. Okay. Do you see it at full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is I'll call it a DAU histogram. So let's unpack that a little bit. So this is daily active users, and I'm measuring for all the users that I have, I'm measuring how many days in the last 28 days did they use the product. And by you, or were they active in the product? And that might mean different things. It could be as general as, did they open the app, or it could be as specific as they shared a photo, or they liked something, or they bought something, right? And so there's different definitions of what active means. But this is a company where, you can see there's a lot of users on the left side that, didn't really use it very much out of 28 days. So they use it once or twice. And the reason we're using 28 days
Mhm.
is because it's like a month, but it's not 30 days or 31 days where you might have 5 weekends in there
Yeah,
versus
yeah,
4 weekends. And so 28 days kind of standardizes that and kind of takes out those day of the week
got
effects.
it.
Um, but we're just looking at how many times or how many days were the users active in this app. So here we can see that there's a bunch of them. Most of them are less than 10, and then there's kind of this long tail out to the
Yeah,
right.
I see.
So this is, I don't know, fairly typical. It kind of depends on what type of app it is. This might be something that is not used very often. But then we can look at different types of DAU histograms to kind of understand why this is helpful. Maybe we'll call this one kind of an average histogram. And then here's one that is not so great, right? This is actually an e-commerce site where they have users who really just kind of, it's like a one and done type of purchase decision. You just go and you
Check
find
it
what you're
out.
looking for, and you're done. Maybe they're selling shoes or something, and people only buy shoes once every 3 or 4 months. And so,
Right.
here, most of the users just use it once out of the last 28 days. And so that actually raises the question, is 28 days the right time period for this particular company? And so that's something that we can play with. We can expand it to 91 days or 182 days to see if you get more usage during those windows, depending on the expected frequency. But anyway, this is kind of a case of low engagement.
And quick question, when you show or display those two histograms, what kind of a story behind those numbers you typically use to rationalize the difference or kind of explain the behavior?
Well, it's totally dependent on the type of business that it is. Like this one is from an e-commerce company. This previous one, I actually forget where it comes from. But and then we have another one that I think is a shining example of one that you might want to put in a pitch deck. All right, so this is one where you can see, okay, yeah, we've got a bunch on the left that don't use it a whole lot, but we have evidence over here on the right. You see this bulge over around 26 days, right, where you might consider those power users, right? They're using the product almost every single day out of the last 28. And so if you've been able to find power users, that starts to get into evidence of product market fit. That's something you can tell an investor, like, hey, we've got this segment of users that is using this thing a lot. And then there would be subsequent analysis to go in and figure out who those people are, how they're using it, what features they find the most valuable, where did they come from in terms of marketing channels, things like that. But that is kind of working backwards from the data that you're collecting on your product, and then saying, all right, well, what are we learning here about who's using it, and how does that map to our original theory of the case, and what adjustments should we make in terms of developing this product so that it's something that people we're honing more closely in to building something that more people want, and then also determining who these power users are and going and finding more of them. All right, so
got it.
So so this is something that I think would be an excellent slide to show in a Series A pitch deck, for example, where you have passed your seed funding round, you've gone through the experimental phase, and you've learned from actual users of your product how it's used, and then you can then say, all right, based on what we've learned, if you give me $5 million, I can go grow this business and make it a big deal.
Yeah, because in essence, what you're showing here is really not just a one-time hit. Like, it's really long-term attraction of users. There's stickiness here
Yeah, so
Yeah.
exactly. And like if somebody's using a product 28 or 26 days out of 28,
Yep.
it's becoming part of their life, right? It's becoming
Exactly.
part of their job, part of
Yep.
their habit system. And it's more likely that they will continue to use it out into the future. And that's something that we'll look at next is,
Yep.
how does this retention measure
Hmm.
translate in, or sorry, how does this engagement measure of frequency of use, how does that translate into retention over a longer period of time?
Got it. Got it. Very cool. So typically, when you work with founders in trying to help them uh, explain their data, what is the typical process you go through? Let's assume you working with the early stage startup
Mm-hmm.
and they did some pilots, they have some traction with their product, but they need to really convince using a compelling arguments why an investor would put money uh, for their venture. So
Mm-hmm.
what is the process you go through?
Well, first we want them to instrument as early as possible so that we can start collecting data,
Yep.
and then it's to use that data on a consistent basis to iterate and to learn from it, and then make adjustments and see what you learn. I think if we're kind of bringing this back into the story that you're
Yep.
telling investors, I like to think of it as like the hero's journey, with you as the founder or the founding team at the center of it, right? Where
Yep.
you've had this, you had this awful life before, and you realize there was a better way to do it, right? And
Yep.
then you say, aha, I've got this idea. But that's just the beginning. That's just the exposition of part of the
Yep.
story. And then
Call
there's
to
the rising
adventure, we call it.
there's the rising tension of
Yeah.
these are your experiments during this product market fit phase. And once you kind of, sometimes there's like an aha moment, like, we went to a trade show and our desk was mobbed with interest. We had so much
Yeah.
pull from the market that we couldn't handle it. Or we realized that our AWS costs were soaring because we had so much usage, and we were
Yeah.
going to have to pay more money. And we realized that we needed to get more data engineers or more backend engineers. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That's the
so
ideal scenario, I would say.
yeah, it's like you start developing these good
Yeah.
problems to have, right?
Right.
Because your product is so popular.
Yep.
And so so there's a qualitative component to product market fit where, there's no numbers to it. You just feel it, like, because people's their eyes dilate when they hear
Yeah.
about your product, or they're like, oh, I must have that. And or
Yep.
people start talking about it online, without you even prompting them, and it's a very positive sort of, conversation, and they're lining up or to,
Yep.
to get on your waiting list, or whatever it is. It's
And
uh,
another one that's qualitative, of course, is the customer surveys, where you can get lots of data
yeah.
and can actually see
So customer
patterns.
surveys are interesting because they're both qualitative and quantitative.
Yep. Yep.
And Sean Ellis, the growth hacking guru, has a great rubric where he says, if you ask people how disappointed would you be if your product just went away the next
Yep.
day, and 40% of them say, oh, I'd be very disappointed,
Yep.
then that's another sign of product market
Indicator.
fit.
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's sort of ancillary questions that you can ask around, like, well, if it went away, what would you use? Or what is a substitute product for you? Or how do you even define this product? And
Sure.
so you can learn a lot from your customers in terms of those surveys. So that would be what I would consider kind of a combination of qualitative and quantitative
Got it.
measure of product market fit.
Yep.
And then there's things like engagement measures and retention measures, which I can talk about in a second, that quantitatively support the qualitative signals that you're getting. And so if you can bring all of those things together,
Mhm.
into your story, that to me is a very convincing pitch to an investor. That um, and the other thing is, I think you don't want to use too much data.
Yeah.
I think there's a limit to how much data you can use, and I think one way I think about it is, can you leave that investor with one number or maybe two, but one number that they can tell their family about at the dinner
Yeah.
table that night? Uh, you know, did you know that um, 50% of streaming on Netflix comprises 65% of streaming on the internet, or something, just some number that they want to share that relates back to
That's a great
why you're
idea.
in business and what problem you're trying to solve and the value that you bring. If you can, leave them with one number, it's so much easier to remember one number than five different growth metrics and retention metric. Like, it's hard to remember a bunch of numbers,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so and that's actually where the visual storytelling, if you can show it in a chart and show, well, we've got this histogram and it shows these people over here on the right,
Yeah.
that's easier to remember too. You don't even have to remember a number. You just have to remember
Sure.
that, oh, their data says that they've got power users. And
Yeah.
so,
You can argue with that. It's really, it's proven. It's
yeah,
numbers do the
right,
talking.
right.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of zeroing again on the founder. He's trying to convince or attract investors through his
Or
pitch
she,
deck,
yeah.
or she, of course. And obviously, there are the engagement data that you talked about,
Yeah.
that basically demonstrate how his product is or her product is performing. But typically, there's also, there's a dedicated slide for the financial forecast. So talk a little bit about the different, data storytelling tactics you need to include in a pitch deck that are kind of the typical characters that always show up.
Sure. I would say that the financial slides, to me, are relatively straightforward and don't require a lot of creativity. And I don't know, that a lot of it is a projection, and they take
Yeah.
Excel and they drag it to the right
Yeah.
with their growth rate, and it goes up like a hockey stick. I don't necessarily put a lot of stock in those projections. But what I do try to do is show is get more information about retention, because really retention is the core of, not only are you building something that people want, but they will continue to use it long term, and that is kind of the kernel of customer lifetime value. And
Yep.
if you have something where people are willing to pay for something over a long period of time, then that can help finance a lot of things, and help you grow in a profitable way. And so let me share some more
Sure.
data, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with retention. Give me 1 second to
Yep.
reshare. Okay, so this is, you see this?
Not yet.
Let me know when you can see it.
Not yet.
This is where Final Cut Pro comes in.
Exactly. Try to stop sharing and share again.
Okay. How about now?
It doesn't show up for some reason. I don't know why.
Does it say it's trying?
Has started. It says David Smith has started screen sharing. Double click to enter full screen mode. Maybe you need to double click somewhere there. No, that's probably me. Yeah. I don't know. It doesn't show up. No worries. I mean,
Uh,
we can continue.
yeah. All right. So I'll describe it and see if this works. And maybe I can send you some pictures later and
Yeah, yeah.
you can, I don't know. Um, so, what we also, so what we like to look at is cohort retention curve. So a cohort is just a group of customers. And
Yep.
typically what we'll do is we'll group them into all of the customers that started transacting with us or started using the product in a certain month, right? So
Yep.
you say, all right, all of the November of 2023 customers, we're going to group them together, and then we're going to measure how they perform over time. And that
Got it.
means how many of them come back in December? How
Mm.
much money do they spend in December and January and February? So some of them, will transact once and never do anything with us again. But
Yep.
we're particularly interested in the ones that continue to come back, right? Because and well, because they're the ones that are going to drive
Yeah.
customer lifetime value.
Exactly.
And so we want to find so what we're measuring is a couple of things. One is retention, which is of the 100% of customers that by definition we started with in November of 2023, how many are still using the product in June of 2024? So
Got it.
that's, I don't know, 7 months later, 8 months later. We can plot a curve, and it typically looks like a big drop off in months 1 and 2, but then there's a leveling out period.
Hmm.
And by now, by 8 months into it, we may be leveling out. And so if you have that leveling out, that means that, okay, some percentage, and it kind of depends on what percentage this is, but like 20%, 30%,
Mm.
40% are still using the product 6 months later.
Got it.
Um,
Yeah.
that's interesting to me as an investor because, okay, not only do they like to use it 26 days out of 28, but they're using it,
Yeah. For a long
since last
time.
November. So this is really good news that they've built
Yep.
something that has kind of become part of this person's life over a long period of time.
Yep.
Um, let me
Got it.
try to share one more time. What each of this is spaghetti, um, but what we're doing is we're taking these monthly cohorts, which are just groups of customers that all started in the same month, and we're measuring how they perform over time. So we can see that we'll just take this top line one here. So every cohort starts at 100% by definition. This one dropped down to about 78%,
Mhm.
and then maybe about 68% in month 2, and maybe about 65% in month 3, below 60% in month 4. And you can kind of see their evolution. They're dropping out over time.
Yep.
These other cohorts dropped off a lot quicker. So almost all the time when you look at a lot of companies, you see patterns where there's this initial drop off period, and that's just the way it is
Yep.
for many companies, especially consumer companies, where you cast a wide net, you do some marketing, they come in, they try it out, it's not for me,
Yep.
and that's
Curiosity.
just, that's just the way it is. But
Yep.
that's okay. That's okay. But the other key thing that we're looking for is a leveling out period
Mm.
along here. So we can see that these newer cohorts, these shorter lines here at the bottom, are starting to level out around maybe 10%, right? So at month 6, it looks like about 10% of the users are still around. Now,
Yep. Mhm.
obviously, the question becomes, well, is 10% a good number or a bad number? And the answer is it depends. It depends on what type of business you are. If you are a consumer transactional company like we were talking about before that just sells kind of one and done footwear or something,
Mhm.
this might be, this still seems a little low, but this would be better than if you were a B2B SaaS that should be very sticky and should be integrated with that company's business. If a B2B SaaS shows really low retention, that's a much bigger red flag than if a consumer transactional company does. So
So you have different benchmarks for each
yeah,
industry,
there,
basically.
there are different benchmarks. I can share some of those benchmarks with you and maybe include them in the
Yeah.
show notes or something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Great.
that's this is an important phenomenon. So we're looking for this. Just the presence of a leveling off period is important, and then how high that leveling off period also matters, right? So
Got it.
at least this company found somebody that wants to use it over a longer period
Yeah.
of time, and so maybe if they can adjust their marketing, they can move these curves up, right? So if you can show evidence that you're moving these curves up, um, up and to the right, and where the 6 month retention is getting higher and higher, that is more convincing than we see in the example where the curves are kind of moving down and to the left, where the newer curves are underperforming
Right.
the comparable curves. So
Yeah.
we can look at some other companies in this way, just other examples. Here's one that has higher retention. Here we are 10 months since first, or 15 months first, and they still have 35, 40% of their
That's
customers.
incredible.
Right.
It's amazing.
Well, it depends. If again, if they're a B2B SaaS, this might be okay. If they're a consumer transactional, it could be incredible. So it kind of depends on what your perspective is.
Got it. Let me ask you something else.
Sure.
In terms of you've been working with founders, obviously with investors. What are the typical misconceptions you get from both sides about data or data storytelling slides?
Well, I mean, I think people are sometimes afraid to use it because it might expose imperfections or things that they don't necessarily want, warts, right? Things that they don't necessarily want to share with the world
Yeah.
or with their investors. But I think that's the wrong approach. I think it's more effective to say, yeah, we're not perfect, but these are the things that we've learned. This is how we're trending, and we know so much more now than we did. And if you invest in us, then we can continue to get better. So I think there's power in being able to show your approach and being able to show how you think, and show some results based off that, even if everything that you're doing isn't absolutely perfect.
So just to kind of rephrase what you're saying, let's say we're looking at this chart, and let's say I'm a SaaS company, and this is completely below, the benchmark in the industry. You saying basically, as a founder, it's in my best case to kind of reveal that I realized there's a problem here based on this data that I'm learning, but these are the remedy actions I'm going to take to fix that. So you think that approach is much better than just showing kind of rosy numbers.
Well, right. I mean, if I'm a founder and I'm dedicating, 10 years of the prime of my life in building a business, I would want to know if what I'm doing is underperforming similar companies, right? And
got it.
That might be an indication that I'm either doing the wrong thing, or that we need to pivot the product or pivot the marketing or make a wholesale change to what we're doing. I just think having more information is better than burying your head in the sand.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think honesty and kind of opening up the kimono, so to speak, showing the numbers. It's really important.
I think if you're dealing with the right kind of investors, they will support you because you're working with them. You're collaborating with them. You're saying, hey, here's what we're doing well. Here's what we're doing not so well. How can you help me?
Right.
Here's what we would do with your investment and so forth. I just think it leads to a more transparent and healthy relationship between the founder and the investor than trying to sugarcoat everything.
Absolutely. All right. So let's say take a step back and kind of really take a forest view a little bit about where data storytelling is headed in the future, especially now with where AI is all the rage. Where do you see, what's up next for us?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this kind of Cambrian explosion of creativity in all areas of tech, right? Where
Yeah.
everybody is taking a look at this generative AI and saying, wow, how can that improve my job, improve my bottom line, or what new products can I create? I think there's all kinds of interesting modeling techniques from a data science perspective, and then there's interesting visualization techniques. Now, I haven't seen anything that changes. Let's see, how do I want to formulate this? Um, there's a lot of people trying in the data analytics and visualization space. I haven't necessarily seen anything yet that I'm like, oh wow, that really works well. That changes how I would approach that
Got
particular
it.
use case. There are people trying, and I love that they're trying, and I think they will get there, or we will get there together.
Yep.
But I don't see it yet in
Yes.
terms of is there a new killer visualization tool that leverages generative AI to create those charts that I just showed you? No, but there are tools that help you write the queries, that help you munge the data and get it to the point where you need it. There are tools that create synthetic data that help you do data modeling. There are lots of kind of foundational tools that help you get to that end
Mm.
product faster and
Yes.
more effectively. And so I'm pretty confident that somebody will at some point develop a generative AI dashboarding tool as well.
Yeah.
But it's more like they're enhancing the steps for the analysts to get there, as opposed to just doing it for the
Doing
analysts.
it.
Now,
Right.
there are folks that are building some pretty advanced data products that are trying to replace analysts.
Yep.
I think where that comes in is trying to answer the easy question. If you have a data team at a company,
Yep.
and there, you might have a bunch of dashboards, but they come to the data team and they say, oh, well, I don't have a dashboard that shows me sales by territory just for April, not counting our biggest customer or something like that.
Yep.
But but people are developing chatbot types of tools where the end user can just type that in and get
The
get a
results.
result,
Yes.
as opposed to bothering the data team. And so that not only alleviates the need for additional analysts on the data team, it makes the rest of the business more productive, and it means the data team can focus on higher value added tasks. So we're getting there. But I would expect in 18 months we're probably having a much different conversation, but we're not quite there yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know that I've seen so many examples, especially, in the case of the validation and accuracy of the data that you get from generative AI. So you got to be super careful with what you
Oh,
get.
yeah, and that to me is the biggest
Yeah.
thing, because if someone, just forget about AI, just if a data analyst gives you a report that you don't trust, then
Yep.
you lose trust in that analyst, right? You lose trust
Yep.
in the whole process, and it
Exactly.
sets back your data-driven decision making significantly. And so the same standard applies to AI tools. Like, they have to be fully trustable in order to move the ball forward. And I think a lot of this work that people are doing to make the models more explainable
Mhm.
is super important for a lot of different areas, but certainly in analytics, and explaining how they arrived at the result
Yeah.
is a key component of that. Another thing that we're seeing in the future of AI is, like, I think people are realizing, or not just AI, but just rethinking the value of a data team in an organization, and using
Mm.
visual storytelling to help communicate that. One of the trends that I'm seeing is metrics trees,
Mm.
where you have your KPIs that you are trying to drive, but those all have precedents or antecedents that need to happen. If you're going to drive revenue 10%, Well, how do you do that? Do you, get more inbound? Do you do more outbound? Do you
Yep.
spend more in advertising? What are the drivers that feed into that KPI that you're trying to drive? And so what we're seeing is kind of instead of like a regular dashboard, it's more of like a canvas approach. So you can kind of see, all right, here are the upstream drivers pointing into the downstream KPIs, and
I see.
and modeling this as a tree kind of structure, and then seeing charts at each stage of the tree, being able to zoom in and zoom out to see. You can zoom into one process or zoom out to see the overall process.
That's amazing.
I think that's a really interesting approach that more and more companies are starting to make.
It's like a Prezi for data storytelling, right?
Exactly what it is. We actually had a company that we invested in at the Venture City, not to promote any one company, but Count has a canvas that helps you build metrics trees. So that you can find all about it on their website. But super interesting, and I think it's an area that will change the paradigm for how business users get their data within a company.
Right. Just to wrap up, maybe you can summarize for our audience comprised of marketers, leaders, founders. What would you say are your top 3 tips if they want to use data storytelling to explain their numbers?
Well, it takes work. I mean, it looks kind of simple to create those charts, but it takes a lot of work to not only you have to kind of take all the raw data and get it into a form that you can analyze, but then you have to analyze it and go through it and pick out what is important for you. So there's a lot of that below the iceberg type of work that needs to be done. And then, kind of once you, and that's the hard part, is like synthesizing all of that really, really raw information into something valuable. But then I think it becomes keep it simple, right? We talked about
single message.
We talked about, communicating one number that they can take with them, or don't show too many numbers and don't show too many charts. Keep it simple, dumb it down, whatever you have to do. But data has a place. It's more powerful, probably the less you use it. It's super powerful. Use it accordingly. Don't overuse it. And so I think that's the takeaway. And then I don't know. I guess do the work, keep it simple, and be transparent. I think that's the other thing.
I love this.
Whenever possible, like be willing to share how you got to a number and let people audit what you're doing, because that leads to trust. And that's where the metric trees, I think, come into play. Like those lead to trust because you can see, all of the numbers that feed into how we're measuring things in the organization, or how we're measuring things in this pitch deck that I'm giving to an investor. Like just be open and transparent with, here's my raw data. If you want to redo this analysis, feel free. I challenge you to come up with something different. But I think do the work, keep it simple, be transparent. That's what I would go with.
Love it. Love it. This is great stuff. Thank you so much, David. This has been amazing. I know my audience will love all these great insights and practical, actionable ideas on how to kind of leverage the data. So before we close, if people had some question for you, how can they reach out?
I'm available on Twitter and LinkedIn, DKSmith01. Happy to answer whatever questions from anybody. And that's probably the best place to reach me.
Brilliant. All right. So thanks again, David. And for all of you tuning in or watching this on YouTube, I'll see you in the next episode of the Visual Storytelling Today podcast. Thank you.